telling the general population to take responsibility for environmental damage. The government acts as a main actor for the environmental atrocities. There's confusion in who causes the environmental issues between society and the government. But the society does not cause these issues. Advocacy groups should pressure the governments to make changes that are high in debt, structural changes. This means that individual action has no effect on the current situation with the environment, but the only way to counteract that is if the government intervenes and makes extremely valuable changes in the services of the country. For example, trash collectors, sewage systems. The government is the only body with the capacity to cause change. A quick example right now. Water in Mexico City, 40% is lost due to sewage leaks. If you ask individuals to take responsibility and save water, that won't help. Advocacy groups should lobby governments so they force, cap, and trade policies. We can help the situation with climate change and the global economy. There will be incentives for all countries. This can create a global bidding systems for total CO2 emissions of each company. Companies will now pay an enormous fee or go into legal trouble if they go over the limit of tons of CO2. If they exceed certain use of natural resources, companies that don't use all their permitted emissions can sell them or save them for future use. Since companies cause most of the pollution, according to Climate Accountability Institute, in a published report called the Carbon Majors Database, which attributes CO2 production due to companies, we should target companies with cap and trade policies so the environmental issue gets solved and there are also economic issues resolved along the way.
That's it?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. We now ask the third speaker of the opposition to start a cross-examination to the first speaker of the proposition. You can stay sitting, please.
Well, first, do you agree that the current environmental crisis is of global scale, or do you think it is only something that will affect small parts of the world?
It's global scale.
Global scale. Okay, and do you think this motion could help potentially in global scale, or do you think it could only be applied in small parts of the world?
Global scale.
Global scale. Okay. Do you believe that it has not yet occurred environmental advocacy groups to focus more on lobbying?
Could you repeat that, please?
Do you believe that it has not occurred yet to environmental advocacy groups to focus more on lobbying governments?
Yes, I do believe.
You believe they haven't
No,
thought of that yet?
I believe they have
Okay,
lobbied
okay.
governments,
So,
pressure governments.
if they already thought of doing that, why are they not focusing on the lobbying right now?
Well, there is focusing. So you can see in the Sea Shepherd in the Cayman Islands. You can see how Sea Shepherd takes. It's an advocacy group. Sea Shepherd. They take action with whales.
So, you say that this lobbying that the group you mentioned is working,
What do you mean working?
is doing something to
Yeah,
avoid it.
Advocacy groups do cause change,
Okay.
and they pressure them.
So, why are we still in the climate crisis?
It's a thing that takes time.
How much time does it take?
There has been really. There hasn't been really focused on the climate change by the society, by the government, and the government needs to change that.
Why do you think the government isn't focusing on changing the current situation?
Because they won't take responsibility because it benefits them most of all.
Exactly.
Time. Thank you. We ask the first speaker of the opposition to open their bench. You have 2.5 minutes on the clock whenever you say the first word. Your time stands running.
To start, regarding the concept that we will be using for the debate, we would like to define environmental advocacy groups as any group, as any non-profit organization with the objective of solving the current environmental crisis, for example, Greenpeace. Lobbying. Lobbying is the negotiation with public officials or politicians with the intention of changing or influence the government's decision. Environmental policies. Any measure by the government regarding human activities in the environment in order to prevent or reduce harmful effects on ecosystems and climate. We will take the status quo as, right now, environmental advocacy groups are not focusing on lobbying governments, but instead convincing individuals to act themselves. This among the crisis we are living, which is of global scale. Now, we disagree with the motion because government is unlikely to take action that would hurt the economy, and any helpful action would probably do so. It is therefore futile to resort it to for help. Action by the government would hurt industries such as the fossil fuel industry, and therefore the economy of many industries relying on those resources. Hurting the economy would anger the population, threatening the government in place, bringing in another on the premise of economic growth, involving actions contrary to those that are being aimed at. And corporations with more resources and power than these groups would lobby back against them to protect their special interest, rendering the group's efforts useless. Lobbying from activist groups would threaten corporations' profits, so they would then lobby back against them, and as they have been for some time, and the corporations would end up winning as they have more resources. Before proceeding, I would add that we do not oppose the lobbying of governments. In a few and unlikely scenarios, it might work, but we do believe it should be done by other actors, such as companies in the renewable energy sector, who have more resources to succeed than advocacy groups. The groups could instead focus on pressuring individuals in developed countries in order to maximize results.
Thank you.
Thank you. We ask, do you want them out?
No. Can we pass through?
We can pass them.
Okay. We ask the third speaker of the proposition to start a cross-examination to the first speaker of the opposition.
So, I have many questions. Are companies individuals or not?
No, but most of companies are private, like they have much more money than individuals, and as they say, to take advocacy groups to individuals doesn't like help anything. So companies are not.
That's the
are
motion
not
we're
individual.
talking
They are not
about.
individual.
But we're talking about pressuring individuals to take action. It's not companies. Okay, so can I know your source, please?
Yeah. According to an article published by Forbes in 2019 by the journalist Neil McCarthy, who is fairly recognized, oil and gas giants spend millions lobbying to block climate change policies.
Okay, are you aware of what cap and trade policies are?
Like, I don't know the exact policy, but we know that they like buy the people in the Senate, so the policies don't happen because their profits are most of oil, and the policies are limiting carbon emissions.
Did you know that these policies have been applied in China and states in the US such as California have reduced emissions by as much as 20%? CO2 emissions with cap and trade policies. And with the cap and trade policies, if you force companies to buy the amount of emissions they can emit, I guess, you can help the economy and create a new market and reduce the CO2 emissions in total. So that would answer your comment about the economy, that it would affect the economy and solve the climate change crisis. And these policies can be applied by the government.
And the thing you said was not achieved by the advocacy groups, and you said only 2 countries, and we agree that it's in a global scale. So,
But the US and China are the countries that pollute the most in the world. China is, responsible for 30% of all CO2 emissions in the world, and the US is responsible for 15%.
Time. Thank you. We now welcome the second speaker of the proposition to continue with their case. You have 2.5 minutes in the moment you start speaking.
Okay, another argument for our advocacy groups are pressuring the government to imply laws that reduce commercial waste using abatement measures. Climate change has been affecting our planet. There needs to be a solution to the issue, but who is the biggest contributor for this problem? The government and companies have been blaming climate change issues on individuals. Unfortunately, society hasn't noticed that the change that needs to be made is by the government and not by them. The government and the companies need to be involved in climate change issues because they are the main source that is causing this inflation. The advocacy groups need to implement new laws to improve the quality of our environment. In the present, environmental laws exist, but they are not consistent and it should be modified. These laws should be able to influence the government and the process of manufacturing, yet it only affects society, pressuring them to change their lifestyle to a sustainable one. On the other hand, companies do not implement these laws in their daily labor, resulting in excessive production of carbon emissions. These laws should be changed into a more strict and effective measure. The advocacy groups should pressure the government to imply a law that reduces commercial waste, using abatement measures for the companies as the producers. This would result in the reduction of the quantity, intensity, and saturation of pollutants and harmful substances during the process of production. Most of the countries have environmental regulations, but sadly, most of them don't abide by their system, only making word agreements without actually taking actions to improve. This is because people need the guidance of the advocacy groups to take these actions to change. For example, China and the United States make a great example for the negativity of this situation. These countries are the ones that pollute the most in the world. China having 30% and the USA having a 15% of rate of pollution. These countries have a lot of environmental policies to protect the environment, whereas they have the biggest export markets in the world. These laws are loosened up by the government and they don't encourage political and moral actions. That's why we think that the environmental advocacy groups should prioritize on the government for changing environmental policies and laws to elaborate a better environmental thing.
Thank you. We asked the first speaker of the opposition to start a cross-examination towards the second speaker of the proposition.
So, in recent time, the People's Republic of China has become the most carbon-emitting state on Earth. Do you think that among the current trade war and their economic deceleration, Xi Jinping would listen to what environmental advocacy groups have to propose if it affected in any way giants like Sinopec or CNCP?
Look, they need to listen to these changes because they are the ones that are polluting. And this is a global warming thing that they are affecting in the world. These are global emissions that they are affecting in the country. So the government needs to take action by listening to the advocacy groups. Thank you.
Okay. So now welcome the second speaker of the.
Do you still have questions?
Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah, I have time.
Sorry.
Who made the government implement the policies?
The advocacy groups does the
Do you have any evidence?
No, we haven't still. This is the debate. Why we should concentrate the advocacy groups to pressure the government, not the advocacy groups making the governments to do it. They haven't done it yet. So we are proposing that the advocacy groups should imply the government, and we haven't done it in the future, and we will do it in the future. Thank you.
Do you think it is realistic to expect from a politician that will only be in office for a few years to be interested in policies that will show their positive in the long term, but their negative effects in short term? What would the groups lobbying for these policies would have to do to be heard?
Because of the pressure worldwide, you know? Because it's in a global scale, so you should hear the advocacy groups, because they have, they're just concentrated in making the changes for the government.
But it is realistic? Like
Yes,
to
it is
expect from them?
realistic. That's why it's a debatable title.
And why it doesn't happen in much countries?
Because the advocacy groups are trying to change the society, but society isn't enough to change the worldwide.
Could you describe
Time.
Thank you.
Okay. So, we welcome the second speaker of the opposition to continue their case. They have 2.5 minutes on the clock whenever you say the first word.
To begin with, I would like to add that regulating businesses, as the affirmative side has stated, or the consumer behavior of the developed world will trigger a series of other potentially deadly crises. Regulation and policies by governments is unlikely to succeed without eco-friendly alternatives, too costly for most governments, with the exception of the United States. For instance, regulating meat consumption could trigger a famine crisis in countries that depend on meat production. You regulate meat, the price increases, and then you screw over the economy of the country. Furthermore, if it's not clear by now, environmental advocacy groups are simply not present in authoritarian states such as China, Iran, and the United Arab Emirates, many of which are responsible in big part for the current crisis. Out of the West and out of the developed and democratic countries, these groups' influence is severely limited. That's why we advocate for the alternative. such as lobbying being carried out by other environmentally responsible for-profit corporations such as Tesla, as the groups should remain focused on raising awareness to individuals. Furthermore, I would like to add that the affirmative side mainly stated what the government should do, but they're not being realistic in the sense that the government doesn't do what they should. They do what they want to survive. A government does not, as stated by the second speaker, they do not need to listen. The government will do what they want, and what they want is for their economy to survive. You cannot force an authoritarian government such as China to listen to advocacy groups precisely because they are an authoritarian. Maybe in the United States people will listen, but when you have a government that does not move because they're firm in their position, precisely that is the definition of an authoritarian government, they will not listen to any advocacy groups, and it affects their economy even less. And if you consider that the China economy is going down gradually at this moment, then why would they listen to somebody that will affect their economy? Furthermore, it is also worth stating that you cannot lobby back. The thing about advocacy groups is that they are weak compared to companies such as Exxon. Exxon is the biggest petroleum company in the world right now. Exxon has $400 billion. One of the biggest companies that is related to climate change has $300 million. When these companies lobby back, you're going to be forced, you're going to have $400 billion of people lobbying back against your government versus $300 million. The power that these companies have is way too big for the companies such as Greenpeace to be able to fight back. For the companies to be able to fight back. And how are you going to change the world with companies that are this big? Thank you.
Thank you. We ask the first speaker of the proposition to start a cross-examination towards the second speaker of the opposition.
Okay, first of all, could you describe deadly crisis? You mentioned deadly crisis.
You can start a famine by regulating the markets because people depend on those markets, such as a meat market.
But countries don't necessarily rely right now on meat markets.
Many countries do, such as African countries. If you refer to the United States, of course, they do not rely, but you have 4 countries that stay on that market, and that market depends on.
It's mostly agricultural.
What happens if you regulate agriculture?
We're talking about meat right now.
Agriculture and meat would both be regulated.
Okay, so you're saying China won't change because of the advocacy groups, but there will be. I'm just saying there's global pressure. When USA changes, more countries take action. Like you said, USA changes, and more countries will take action, and they will pressure China to take that enormous change. And I just want to make this clear: individuals are not companies. Okay. What's your source on the deadly crisis thing?
Public Action on Global Warming, published by ABC News in 2018 by Gary Langer.
Is ABC News a little bit biased?
Why would it be biased?
Because that's what I've seen.
All right, how can you say that's what you've seen? Prove to me that it is biased. Published in BBC News as well, you have the climate change, where 7 charts of what you can do to help.
Can you read that?
Published in BBC News in 2018 as well.
Okay. Another biased source. You very leftist.
Could you prove that they're biased?
Environmentalists' worst enemy, maybe their own policies, written in August 2014 by Thomas J. Peel, president of the American Energy Alliance. It was published in Forbes as well.
Okay. That'll be all.
Okay, time.
Thank you, speaker. So we ask now the third speaker on the proposition to close the bench. You have 2.5 minutes on the time you start speaking.
So, judges, we have seen.
Could you please step up?
Judges, we have seen a lot of valuable information on both sides, but I think they have not necessarily given us an option on individuals, even though that's what the motion states. They talk about companies not changing, but companies aren't individuals, and we're stating, and the motion states that that environmental advocacy groups should focus on individual actions and for people to take responsibility, like things that are like recycling, which are not necessarily companies. As not having heard anything from them, their arguments were that it will cause a global or maybe an economy crisis, which we can simply solve by implementing cap and trade policies, which just creates a new global market and reduces the effect of these crises. Another reason why I believe my house should win is because they do not give us a valuable solution. They do not give us any information or really viable sources. BBC, there have been studies on BBC about how they're biased. I think they're right wing. There have been studies about it on nonpartisan media outlets. So, yeah, that would be all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so finally, we ask the third speaker of the opposition to close their bench and this debate. Here.
Well, I would say we won because we did give evidence that environmental activism groups won't be able to lobby successfully. While they argued that they have not achieved anything with the few lobbying that they did, and they only whined about how the government doesn't listen but did not offer a solution to make them listen. Yes, we did not focus on individuals because we agree that individuals are not to blame. But we do think that there are other solutions and there are other alternatives rather than to only blame individuals or the government. We do not agree with the motion because precisely the motion only refers to individuals. And regarding the environmental advocacy groups, you did not prove that they have the capacity to actually lobby to implement the policies you said. We didn't say the policies wouldn't work. We said that those policies wouldn't be achieved by the environmental advocacy groups. I think that is all. Thank you.
Thank you, speakers. We now congratulate everybody for their participations. Here. So your own teachers will give you feedback in due course. Shake hands, very good. Congratulations.
Can I stop here now?